Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She denied me again that night. Not with words, she didn't need to. The silence between us had become its own language. She turned away in bed, the glow from her phone screen reflecting off her skin, scrolling like I wasn't even there. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft clicks of her typing. Probably another late-night chat with someone who made her feel more alive than I did. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I didn't say anything. I just lay there, breathing steady, letting the quiet stretch between us until it felt like a wall. When she finally muttered good night, it didn't sound like a goodbye, but I knew that's what it was becoming. The next morning, I poured coffee into my travel mug and stood by the window. She was already gone, left early for work, or so she said. Her untouched cup sat cold on the counter, next to the same folded note I'd written days ago and never gave her. I tossed it in the trash, grabbed my keys, and left. That day, I met her sister, Claire, at the office. She worked in marketing for the same company handling the gala we were sponsoring. She had that same golden hair, same sharp blue eyes, but none of the arrogance. She was warm, grounded, the kind of woman who asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When she mentioned she'd be attending the event alone, something inside me shifted. I told her she didn't have to. By the time I got home that night, my wife was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, pretending everything was fine. She talked about the gala casually, about what dress she might wear, about the important people she wanted to impress. I listened, silent again, and realized how rehearsed it all sounded. She didn't want to go with me. She wanted to be seen without me. So I let her talk. Let her make her plans. And when she finally asked if I'd already picked someone to bring, I said I had. She didn't even look up from her phone when she said, "Good. Maybe they'll actually enjoy it." I smiled, quiet, calm. She didn't ask who it was, but she would find out soon enough. And when she did, she'd finally understand what it feels like to be replaced, not with revenge, but with composure. Not with anger, but with precision. The night of the gala came faster than I expected. She'd been distant all week, barely saying a word, leaving early for work and coming home late. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't need to. Silence was doing the work for me. That morning, she stood by the mirror, trying on dresses like she was auditioning for someone else's attention. She asked if I liked the black one or the red one. I said either would do. She frowned, said I'd lost my enthusiasm lately. I wanted to tell her it wasn't enthusiasm I'd lost, it was respect. But I didn't. I just tied my tie, grabbed my jacket, and left before she could ask anything else. The event was at the downtown Hilton. When I arrived, cameras were flashing, champagne flowing, people smiling too hard. Claire was already there, standing near the entrance in a simple navy dress. Not extravagant, not loud, just effortless. She smiled when she saw me, genuine and warm. I offered her my arm, and she took it without hesitation. Inside, the music played soft, the kind that fills silence without interrupting it. People turned when we entered, not because of who we were, but because of how calm we looked together. No tension, no pretense, just stillness. It didn't take long for my wife to arrive. She walked in 20 minutes later, wearing the red dress she'd been debating over. She was radiant, but not for me anymore. Her smile faltered when she saw us. I watched her freeze mid-step, her hand tightening around her clutch. Claire noticed it too, but said nothing. She just leaned in and whispered something about how good the band was tonight. I smiled. That was enough. Throughout the evening, I stayed polite, composed. We talked with sponsors, laughed at harmless jokes, and when the photographer asked for a picture, I didn't hesitate. Claire smiled effortlessly beside me. My wife stood across the room, her expression slipping every time someone mentioned my name. By the end of the night, she couldn't hide it anymore. She approached, eyes glassy, voice low but trembling. She asked if this was a joke, if I did it to humiliate her. I looked at her calmly and said, "You told me to bring someone who'd actually enjoy the night." That was the moment she broke. Not because of what I said, but because I didn't raise my voice. People saw her tears. They didn't see my satisfaction. Because it wasn't revenge. It was closure dressed in silence. When the gala ended, the room was still humming with low music and whispers. She stood near the exit, trying to compose herself, pretending her tears hadn't just stolen every pair of eyes in the room. Claire excused herself quietly, giving me a soft nod before disappearing into the crowd. I stayed back, watching my wife. No, the woman who used to be my wife, trying to recover her mask. She wasn't crying out of heartbreak. She was crying because for the first time, she wasn't the one in control. I left without saying another word. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. I loosened my tie, got into the car, and drove through the quiet streets until the city lights faded behind me. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was final, like a door had closed that would never open again. When I got home, her car wasn't there. I knew she'd probably gone to her sister's, maybe to ask why Claire said yes, maybe to accuse her of betrayal. But Claire wasn't the problem. Claire had just been the mirror, showing her what she used to be before she turned cold. The next morning, I woke to a phone full of missed calls. Some from her, some from friends. I ignored them all. I made coffee in silence, scrolled through the news, and let the world spin without me for a while. By noon, I got a message from Ryan. "Dude, what happened last night? She's saying you humiliated her in public." I just replied, "She humiliated herself." I just stood still. Later that day, she finally came home. No makeup, no armor. She looked smaller than I remembered. She said she'd overreacted, that she didn't mean to make a scene. She said she just didn't expect her sister of all people to be there with me. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, calm, unreadable. And for the first time, I saw it, the panic behind her eyes. The realization that I'd stopped being predictable. That night, she slept in the guest room. I didn't stop her. I didn't reach out. I just let the silence stretch until it became the loudest thing in the house. Because I'd finally learned something she never understood. When a man's peace becomes louder than his anger, the game is over. The next morning, the house felt like a museum. Quiet, polished, but empty. She avoided me, moving from room to room like a ghost, pretending to tidy up while her mind scrambled for a way to rewrite what had happened. I didn't make it easy. I didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't apologize. My silence was steady, deliberate, the kind that turns into a mirror. She could see herself in it now, clearly, and she didn't like what she saw. At breakfast, she sat across from me, picking at her toast, trying to act like the night before hadn't happened. When she finally spoke, her voice was too casual. She said she just wanted to know why I did it. I didn't answer right away. I just sipped my coffee, let the seconds stretch until they became unbearable. Then I said quietly, "You stopped showing up long before I did." She looked away. No words, just silence and shame. By the afternoon, she packed a small bag and said she needed space. I nodded. No questions, no reaction. She hesitated at the door, waiting for me to ask where she was going, but I didn't. She left anyway. The door clicked shut, and for a long moment, the sound hung in the air. I didn't chase her. I went to the gym, worked out harder than usual, let the noise of weights and machines drown out everything else. When I got back home, her perfume still lingered in the hallway, fading with every breath. I turned on Netflix just for background noise, poured a drink, and sat on the couch in peace. That night, around midnight, my phone buzzed. 12 missed calls. One message. "Are you really not going to ask where I am?" I didn't reply. I turned off the screen, set it face down, and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight and silence, the kind that feels like freedom, not loss. I made coffee, stepped outside, and watched the neighborhood slowly wake up. For years, she made me feel like I was too much, too present, too attentive, too grounded. But the truth was, I wasn't too much. She was too little. And when you stop begging for connection, the person who took you for granted starts to feel the cold they created. She thought space would make me chase her. Instead, it made her realize I'd already left the moment she stopped looking back. 3 days passed before she came back. No warning, no message, just the sound of her car pulling into the driveway around noon. I watched from the kitchen window as she stepped out, hair tied back, sunglasses hiding eyes that probably hadn't seen sleep. She stood there for a moment like she didn't recognize her own home. When she came inside, the silence between us was thicker than ever. She said she'd stayed at a friend's place, that she just needed to think. Her voice trembled slightly on that last word. I didn't ask what she'd been thinking about. I just nodded and went back to my coffee. She started pacing around the living room, touching things that hadn't moved since she left. as if checking whether I'd replaced her absence with something or someone else. When she noticed the framed photo of us was gone from the mantel, she asked where it was. I told her I'd put it away. That was all. She didn't ask where. By evening, she tried to talk again. Said what happened at the gala wasn't fair, that I'd humiliated her in front of everyone. I looked at her, calm and steady, and said, "You embarrassed yourself long before that night. I just stopped covering for you." She went quiet. Completely. Then she turned and walked to the guest room again. I didn't follow. Later that night, I saw the hallway light flick on. She stood in the doorway, eyes red, hair messy, holding her phone like it was keeping her upright. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. I told her that was because, for the first time, I'd stopped being who she could manipulate. She didn't answer, just stood there, silent, caught between anger and regret. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "You never used to be this cold." I didn't move. I didn't respond. I just let the quiet swallow the room. Because the truth was simple, she wasn't crying for me. She was crying for the version of herself that existed when I still waited for her to care. When she finally walked away, I realized something deeper. She'd wanted power, not partnership. And when I removed myself from her control, she mistook it for cruelty. But it wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. And clarity, to someone addicted to attention, feels like punishment. The next morning, she was gone again. No note, no message, just the faint smell of her perfume and an empty coffee cup left on the counter. I stood there for a while, staring at the cup, wondering how something so simple could feel so final. Then I smiled to myself. This was her last trick, disappearing to see if I'd chase. I didn't. Instead, I showered, dressed, and left for work. The drive was calm, quiet. The sky was clear, the city still waking up. For once, I didn't feel the usual weight pressing on my chest. It was like exhaling after holding my breath for years. At the office, people were still whispering about the gala. About her crying in public, about me leaving with her sister. No one said it to my face, of course. But I could feel the shift, the way people looked at me differently now. Not with pity, but with curiosity. Respect, even. The man who didn't raise his voice, didn't cause a scene, but still made his point. Later that afternoon, Claire stopped by my office. She looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should be there. She said she hadn't heard from her sister since that night. I told her she'd come home briefly, then left again. Claire sighed, said she wasn't surprised. She always runs when she loses control. I didn't respond. She was right, though. Control was her oxygen. And now she was gasping. That evening, when I got home, there was an envelope on the doorstep. My name written in her handwriting. Inside was a single page. No apologies, no accusations, just one line. "You humiliated me, but maybe I needed it." I folded the note, set it on the counter, and left it there. No anger, no satisfaction, just understanding. Sometimes people need to watch themselves fall to finally see the ground they've been standing on. I made dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat by the window as the city lights flickered on. The house was quiet again, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt honest. For years, I'd mistaken chaos for passion, silence for peace. But now I knew the difference. Chaos demands attention. Peace doesn't need it. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for her to walk back through that door. I was waiting for nothing. Because nothing, I'd learned, can finally feel like everything. A week passed. No calls, no messages. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt clean, like the house was finally breathing without her energy in it. I started sleeping through the night again. No arguments, no restless shifting beside me. Just stillness. One evening, I drove to a small diner outside the city. The same place where Claire and I had coffee once, back when she was helping me organize the gala invitations. She was there again, sitting by the window with her laptop open. When she saw me, she smiled. Calm, not flirtatious, not calculating. Just kind. We talked for an hour about work, life, how strange it was to watch people destroy what they claimed to love most. She never mentioned her sister, and I didn't bring it up. Some topics deserve the dignity of silence. When I got home that night, I found her car in the driveway. My wife. She was sitting on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees. I stopped in front of her, said nothing. She looked up, eyes swollen, and said she'd made a mistake. That she thought pushing me away would make me fight harder for her, not vanish completely. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. She said she missed the man who used to care. I told her he didn't disappear. He just stopped waiting for someone who didn't. Her face tightened, like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. She said she'd been staying at her parents' place, that she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, that every time she tried to explain what happened, people looked at her like she'd lost her mind. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to. The silence said it for me. Finally, she asked if there was someone else. I met her eyes and said, "There doesn't have to be someone else for me to move on." That broke her. She started crying again, not the dramatic kind, the quiet, exhausted kind that comes when you realize the damage can't be undone. When she left, she didn't slam the door this time. She just closed it softly behind her. I stood there for a while, listening to the sound fade into the night. That was the moment I understood. She didn't lose me to another woman. She lost me to peace. And that's a kind of competition no one ever wins. After that night, she stopped coming by. The calls slowed, then stopped altogether. I thought that was the end of it. But endings, I've learned, don't always arrive quietly. They circle back one more time to see if you've really changed. A few weeks later, I was at the office late, finishing a report when my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Can we talk?" Just 3 words. I stared at the screen, not angry, not surprised, just still. I typed back, "Tomorrow, 7 p.m., at the cafe near the lake." She replied instantly, "I'll be there." The next evening, I arrived early. The cafe was half empty, the soft sound of coffee machines filling the air. I sat by the window, watching the sunset bleed into the lake. She showed up 10 minutes late, wearing the same red dress from the gala. It was deliberate, of course, nostalgia disguised as sincerity. She sat across from me, eyes darting like she was rehearsing what to say. I didn't speak. I let her fill the silence. She said she'd been thinking about everything. How things had spiraled, how she'd lost sight of us, how she wanted another chance. Her words were shaky, but her tone was calm, almost detached, like she was explaining a mistake she'd already accepted. I listened. Every sentence was an echo of apologies that came too late. She said she'd been going to therapy, that she finally saw how manipulative she'd been. Then she said something that caught me off guard. "When you stopped reacting, I realized how small I'd made you feel." That one hit. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. I'd spent years shrinking myself just to make her feel big. When she finished, she asked if there was any chance left. I looked at her, at the same woman who once made me question my worth, now trembling under the weight of her own awareness. I said quietly, "You taught me what love isn't. I don't hate you for it, but I can't go back." Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue, but no sound came. The silence between us said everything words couldn't. When I left, I didn't look back. The reflection in the cafe window showed her sitting there, staring into her cup, realizing the one thing she'd never expected. She hadn't lost me to another woman. She'd lost me to the man she thought I'd never become. The drive home from the cafe felt longer than it was. The streets were half empty, washed in the glow of streetlights, the air cool enough to make me roll the window down. I didn't feel angry or sad, just hollow, in a clean kind of way, like the part of me that used to ache for her had finally burned out. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a minute before going inside. The house was dark, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I poured a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and thought about what she said, how she realized how small she'd made me feel. It was strange hearing her say it out loud. Validation doesn't heal wounds. It just confirms where they are. I went to bed early that night, and for the first time, I dreamed of nothing. No arguments, no faces, no noise. Just quiet. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across the room. I checked my phone, no messages from her. Instead, one from Claire. She said she'd heard about the cafe meeting from her sister, that she hoped it went okay. She said she was proud of me for how I handled everything, that I'd done something most people never manage, walk away without hate. I didn't reply right away. I just read it twice and set the phone down. There was peace in not needing to respond to everything. Later that day, I drove out to the lake again. The same cafe, the same window seat. But this time, I went alone. I ordered coffee and watched the water move slowly under the wind. It looked effortless, just motion, without struggle. That's what I wanted my life to feel like from now on. When I left, I saw a message from her waiting on my phone. It was short. Thank you for showing me who I really was. I hope you find someone who treats you better than I did. I didn't delete it. I just left it there, unread again, like a closed door that no longer needed locking. As I drove home, I realized something simple but final. She wasn't my mistake. She was my mirror. And once I finally saw myself clearly in her reflection, I didn't need to keep standing in front of it. Sometimes you don't win by being loved again. You win by never needing to be. Weeks passed, and life quietly reshaped itself. The chaos she left behind settled like dust after a storm, and I learned how to move without flinching at memories. Mornings became slower, lighter. I'd wake early, make coffee, open the windows, and let the air fill the house. Silence wasn't something to escape anymore. It was something I protected. One afternoon, while going through my desk, I found the invitation from the gala. The paper still smelled faintly of her perfume. I held it for a moment, not with anger, not nostalgia, just awareness. That night had been the turning point. The moment she realized I wasn't the same man she could guilt or silence. I slipped the invitation into a drawer, closed it, and knew I'd never open it again. Later that week, I met Ryan for dinner. He asked if I'd heard from her. I told him no. He said she'd moved to another city, started over, maybe trying to outrun her own reputation. I nodded, then changed the subject. There was nothing left to say about her. Our story had ended long before it fell apart. After dinner, I drove to the beach. The sky was low and pink, the ocean calm. I parked near the pier, sat on the hood of my car, and watched the tide crawl in. It was the same spot where I used to take her years ago, back when everything still felt simple. The difference was, this time I didn't feel the need to share the view with anyone. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who begged for attention, mistook indifference for mystery, called her distance complex. I didn't hate him. I just didn't recognize him anymore. That version of me had needed love to feel worthy. This one just needed peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, my phone buzzed once more. It was a message from an unknown number. A single line, "I saw you at the pier." I didn't have to ask who it was. I just smiled faintly, turned off the phone, and placed it face down on the hood beside me. The ocean kept moving, uncaring, unstoppable. That's when it hit me. Peace isn't about forgetting someone. It's about remembering them without pain. And somewhere out there, she was probably still looking for closure. But I already had mine. Because she was crying in public that night for a reason, she didn't lose me to her sister. She lost me to silence. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.